Okay, let's dive into this. We're going to unravel a really fascinating genetic puzzle. It actually starts on this remote island, but it ends up with the fundamental rules that govern, well, all life.
So our story starts with something really surprising. Way out in the South Pacific, you have the Melanesian people of the Solomon Islands, right? They have some of the darkest skin you can find anywhere outside of Africa. But, and this is the crazy part, about 5 to 10% of them have this incredibly striking blonde hair.
And get this, that's the highest rate of blonde hair found anywhere outside of Europe. So naturally, that brings up a huge question. Now for ages, the easy explanation, the common theory, was that it came from European sailors or explorers, who visited the islands. Makes sense, right? But is that the real story? Or is there something else, something way more interesting going on?
Well, to figure that out, we actually need to go back in time. Way back. We're talking the 19th century, in a quiet monastery garden. Because it's here that this brilliant monk, a guy named Gregor Mendel, he's the one who gave us the tools to solve exactly these kinds of genetic mysteries.
Yeah, Gregor Mendel, and he wasn't just a monk, He was a serious scientist. He studied math and botany at the University of Vienna, and he was super meticulous. He applied this really rigorous scientific method to all his experiments, and that's how he uncovered the basic rules of how traits get passed down. But here's the wild part. His work was so far ahead of its time that nobody got it. It was pretty much completely ignored. I mean, he published his findings in 1866. He dies. His work is forgotten. And it's not until 1900, that's more than 30 years later, that a few scientists stumble upon his paper and just go, whoa, this changes everything. And his success wasn't just a lucky break. It was all about his brilliant experimental design. First, he picked the absolute perfect organism to study, the common pea plant. Why? Because it had these simple, really clear-cut traits. But the real game changer, his true genius, was that he counted everything. He took a quantitative approach, and that's what revealed these hidden mathematical patterns inside of biology.
Okay, so let's look at how he did it. He used a pretty simple crossbreeding experiment to uncover a really fundamental rule about inheritance. So he starts by crossing two pure types of plants, one that only ever makes round peas and another that only ever makes wrinkled ones. Simple enough. But the first batch of offspring, a total shock. Every single one of them had round peas. The wrinkle trait? Poof! It just vanished. But then, he crossed those plants with each other, and like magic, in the next generation, the wrinkled trait just popped right back up.
Okay, to get what's going on here, we need a couple of key ideas. First, you have a gene. Think of a gene as an instruction for a specific trait, like seed shape. Then you have alleles. Alleles are just the different versions of that instruction. So you've got an allele for round and an allele for wrinkled.
And this is where it gets super cool, because it shows this crucial difference between an organism's genetic blueprint, that's its genotype, and what it actually looks like, that's its phenotype. So a pea plant could totally look round on the outside, but secretly it's still carrying the genetic code for being wrinkled.
This whole experiment led Mendel to his first huge breakthrough, what he called the principle of segregation. He figured out that for any given trait, an organism gets two alleles, one from each parent. And here's the key. Those two alleles separate from each other when that organism goes on to make its own reproductive cells. So, what's the secret? Well, the crucial idea is that some alleles are dominant while others are recessive. In this case, the round allele was dominant over the wrinkled one. That's why the wrinkled trait was totally hidden in that first generation of peas. It wasn't gone. The allele was still there. It was just being masked by the dominant one.
And this is where it goes from just explaining what happened to being this incredibly powerful predictive tool. I mean, one that geneticists literally still use all the time today.
So, think about it. Mendel's discovery wasn't just a, that's neat, explanation for what he saw in his garden. It was basically a formula, a way to predict the future, or at least the future of genetic crosses.
And this is the tool, the Punnett square. It's just a simple grid, but it's brilliant. It lets us map out all the possible combinations of alleles from the parents. We can see all the potential genotypes for the offspring, and, this is the best part, we can calculate the actual probability for each outcome.
And what do you know? This little square perfectly predicts that famous 3-to-1 ratio that Mendel kept seeing over and over. For every 3 round peas, he'd get about 1 wrinkled one. This was a massive turning point because it proved for the very first time that the chaos of life actually followed predictable mathematical rules.
And of course, this isn't just about peas in a garden, right? These same exact principles are the foundation for understanding our own heredity, human heredity, everything from simple traits to really complex diseases.
So let's take a real human example, like albinism. It's a condition caused by a recessive allele. Now, if 2 parents are both carriers, that means they each have 1 dominant allele and 1 recessive one. You can use a Punnett square to see that there's a 1 in 4 chance their child will get both recessive alleles and have the condition. It's the same math, the same ratio Mendel found with his peas.
And that brings us all the way back to our puzzle in the Solomon Islands. Using the very principles Mendel figured out, modern geneticists looked at the DNA of the islanders. And what did they find? The blonde hair had nothing to do with European explorers. It comes from a totally unique, homegrown, recessive gene that evolved completely on its own. Right there, mystery solved.
So when you think about it, Mendel's painstaking work in his little garden over 150 years ago, it literally laid the groundwork for everything we know about genetics today. His principles explain inheritance, they give us the power to predict outcomes, and they're the foundation for the entire modern world of genomics and personalized medicine.
So yeah, his rules were simple, based on 1 gene in a pea plant, but they gave us the basic framework, the fundamental grammar of genetics. They're the starting point, the Rosetta Stone, that lets us even begin to try and decode the 3 billion letters of our own incredibly complex human genetic instruction book.